So I want to show you how we can use the square root property to solve quadratic equations. Okay. So the square root property says you can take the square root, and really any root, of two sides of an equation and create an equivalent equation with a small caveat, so fine print. So, if you have, x squared equals a, then we can say that x, so I can take the square root of both sides, square root of x squared is x equals the square root of a. Now I haven't done my fine print caveat yet. I'll show you how we will change this in just a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by solving the equation x squared minus 81 equals 0, and let's solve it by factoring. Okay, so I have two terms. I'm subtracting. I don't have the x term. This is that difference of squares model. Difference of squares when we factor, remember x plus 9 times x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, so when I solve a quadratic equation by factoring, I'm taking advantage of the zero factor property. Zero factor property. So multiplication equals 0. The way that happens is one of the factors has to be 0. So either x plus 9, that's one of the factors, equals 0, or x minus 9, the other factor, equals 0. And then once you set each factor equal to 0, you go in and you solve for the x again. So I'm just going through and finding my two solutions. So notice, x squared minus 81 equals 0. I have two solutions, a negative 9 and a positive 9. Okay. So if we want to solve the same equation using the square root property, I need to get those same solutions. So the way it works, so this is going to show us our caveat. So I have x squared minus 81 equals 0. Okay. I want to add the 81 to both sides. So now I have x squared equals 81, which is great, right? So now I have something squared equals just a number. So those are the important things to note, right? Something squared is on one side of the equation and only that, and then the other side of the equation has just a number, no variable. That is how it has to be set up for us to use the square root property. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pop up here. So x squared equals 81. So now if I want to get x by itself, right now it's being squared. So then I know to undo the squaring, I will square root. If I square root the left, I square root the right to be balanced. So square root of the squared, x equals, and then square root of 81 is 9. Okay, now, looking over here again, remember I wanted to get these same two solutions. So here's that caveat. If we use the square root property, what we get out is a plus or minus 9. So we have to include the plus, and we usually write this a plus sign over a minus sign, and then we say plus or minus. Okay. We do it right after we take the square root, and you can put the plus or minus on either side. It doesn't matter. It's usually just more convenient to put it with the numeric value. But you want to do it right as you take the square root. Okay. And there are the same two solutions. Okay. So this will also work if that squared part, the something squared is just a bit messier. So here's our next example. I have the quantity 3x minus 1 squared equals 100. So something squared equals a number. Okay, so I have that pattern. Something squared equals 100. So I want to solve for x. There's my x. It's tied up in all of this stuff. So it's kind of like, I always have this impression of you're throwing people off of a dog pile to get to the person down at the bottom. So you just kind of peeling off all of the things harassing the x until we get to the x. So the first thing right on the outside is this squared. So I need to break the squared. So I'm going to square root. And I'm going to do the same thing to the right to keep it balanced. Square root the square, and they go. 3x minus 1 equals, so now the square root of 100 is 10. And what do I do as soon as I take the square root? Plus or minus 10. Okay, because, and you can think of that, right, because negative 10, right, if you had parentheses around your negative 10 and you squared it, you would get the 100. Positive 10, parentheses around it, square it, you get the 100. Okay? Okay, well, here we are. So now I've gotten to 3x minus 1 equals plus or minus 10. So what that means is it either equals positive 10 or it can equal negative 10. So you can solve that by setting, right, write one equation equals positive 10. And write another equation equals negative 10. And then we'll just solve each of these independently. So add 1. So 3x equals 11. Divide the 3. So x equals 11 thirds. Perfectly fine answer. And then solving the second equation, add 1, add 1. So 3x, so negative 10 plus 1 is negative 9. And then divide the 3, so x equals negative 3. There's another solution. Okay? So usually, not always, but I'll say usually, if you have a quadratic equation, and you'll know it's quadratic because you have a squared, an x squared, or an a squared, or a something squared. When you have a quadratic equation, you get two answers. Okay? Not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time. Okay? So here we go. We can now deal with negative square roots. So if you remember, if you have the square root of negative 1, we have to find that to be the imaginary number I. Okay? So we're going to no longer say, oh, we can't do that one. We're just going to use i's to rewrite our answer. So here I have a squared plus 9 equals 0. Something squared and a number. So the first thing you want to do is get the something squared on one side and the number on the other. So you would subtract 9 from both sides. A squared equals negative 9. I'm not sure. I even write the problems. How do I get a's and 9's together in a question? It's like b's and 6's. It's just a bad idea. Sorry about that. So if a squared equals negative 9, I'm trying to get to a, so now we will square root both sides. Square root of a squared is a equals square root of negative 9. Right? So negative 9, so the long way, I'll just do it over here, negative 9. So that's the square root of positive 9 times the square root of negative 1. Square root of positive 9 is 3. Square root of negative 1 is I. So come back over here, square root of negative 9 is 3i. And then remember, right, we just did a square root of both sides, so plus or minus. Okay, so plus or minus 3i is the solution to the equation a squared plus 9 equals 0. Okay, so here are a bunch of practices. If you would like to try on your own before I show you how to get there, I would highly suggest that. Right? You can just hit a pause and come on back. So 7x squared equals 121. So we would, you could either square or you could say, oh, I have something squared and it equals a number. Square root, square root, square root of the square, because, and notice there are parentheses, so it's the entire thing on the left that's being squared. Okay, so when I square root, I get the 7x. Square root of 121 is 11. Remember your plus minus. So 7 times x equals plus or minus 11. So I'm just going to do it all right here. Divide by 7. Gets the x all by itself. Equals plus or minus 11 sevenths. You can write it either as 1 or you could separate those out if you wanted either way. 100 plus x squared equals 0. Okay, so you could subtract the x squared. It's positive right now where it lives on the left, so I'm going to keep it that way. That's the thing that makes me feel better. So instead, I'm going to subtract 100 from both sides. So x squared equals negative 100. Square root both sides. X equals, so square root of a negative 100 right? So plus or minus because we square rooted, and then that would be 10i. So 10 for the square root of 100, I because it was negative. 6x minus 8 squared equals 1. So square root, right? Something squared equals just a number. Squaring and square rooting cancel. 6x minus 8, square root of 1 is 1, and then we remember the plus or minus. So 6x minus 8 equals positive 1, or 8 minus 8 equals negative 1. And then keep going. We can't stop until we get, oh, I didn't circle over here. Can't stop until we get x equals. So add 8. 6x equals 9. So x equals 9/6. Kind of sneaking up here. So that would be 3/2. There's one solution. And then working the other one. So 6x equals 7. So x equals 7/6. There's the other solution. Okay, keeping going. Now, notice here, so I'm on my fourth one. 5 times a squared equals 100. Notice the 5 is not included in the squared. It's its own, right? It's just 5. So I could square root here, but it's going to be nicer for us if we get the a squared and just the a squared by itself, which means this 5 needs to get to the other side. So think about how we're going to move it. And the way we decide is how is it attached? How is it being held here on the left, right? And that's a multiplication that's holding it to the a squared. So we would divide that side by 5. And if we divide the left side by 5, we divide the right side by 5. Cancel on the left. A squared equals, so 100 divided by 5 is 20. And then we square root both sides. And a equals plus or minus the square root of 20. Now, if you've practiced reducing your radicals, you'll know that that's a square root 4 times a square root 5. So a simpler version, simplified version, would be plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5. 8x squared equals 10. Well, this is just like our 7x squared because notice it's the whole 8x that's being squared. Square root. 8x equals plus or minus square root 10. Square root 10 doesn't simplify, so we're just going to leave it like that. Divide your 8. X equals plus or minus square root 10 over 8. Just that, nothing else to be done. Just so you, this is what we are going to call, and there are a couple of these up here. This is an exact solution. Right, so that square root 10 has all of the information. It has all of those decimal places that we're not writing down included in that number when we write it like that. If you use your calculator, to come up with whatever the, what do we get? Square root of 10. Notice my square root symbol. I don't know if you can see that. It started with, my calculator has square root parenthesis, and then I typed in the 10. If I want to have just the square root of 10 and not the 8 underneath the square root, I'm going to close off my parentheses. Okay, so now I'm doing the square root of 10. That's the numerator of my fraction. And I can then divide 8. So 0.395. And I'm going to use a squiggly equal sign for is approximately equal to 0.395, so plus or minus. Okay, so the 0.395 is an approximate solution, and I just rounded to 3 decimal places. Right, you could round wherever. Okay, so exact solution, right, has the square root in it. The approximate is when you start writing decimal places. And we say it's approximate because at some point you stop writing them because you just either run out of numbers on your calculator or time. So last one here. So this is kind of a tricky one. X squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 25. So I'm going to show you two ways. See if I've got a little piece of, I've got a sticky pad right here. Okay, so the first way, we're going to go ahead and use the square root property and show you how it works. So you might be thinking, and you should be thinking, oh gosh, you've got that 16x there. That's a problem. It is a problem. You cannot just take the square root if you have a 16x, and it's totally tempting because you look and it's a square and it's a square and it's a square and it's a square. But, right, it has to be one thing squared on one side equals something on the other, just a number on the right side. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to factor what's on the left. And it's totally set up to do this. I know it's a cheat math question. I get it. But be on the lookout for them. So the left side factors into x plus 8 squared equals 25. Exactly the pattern, right, we've been using. So go ahead and square root both sides. X plus 8 equals, I know you're saying it with me, plus or minus 5. Subtract 8 from both sides. Now, careful, I just wrote a 5. Minus 8. The way those two go together, remember, it's negative 8 plus or minus 5. Okay, so you're going to do negative 8 plus 5 for one of your answers and negative 8 minus 5 for your other answer. Okay, so it looks like negative 3 is 1 and negative 13 is 1. And again, you can check your answers by plugging them into your equation back up here and seeing that you get something, right, that's true. Right? So you plug the negative 13 in for both of the x's. Careful when you plug it in for the x squared, because again, it's that whole negative 13 that gets squared. So you're going to get a positive number here on the front. Okay, I said you would have two ways to solve that last one. I'm going to show you the other way because I know lots of students are going to go that way. We're going to get to these same two answers, I sure hope. Okay, so it was x squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 25. So quadratic equation, you have that linear term, so maybe square root property is not screaming at you to start with. So usually, right, the other strategy for solving quadratic equations is getting one side equal to 0. So subtract 25 from both sides. I'm going to use a calculator here because I need to. 64 minus 25, 39. Okay. Oh, and I forgot my x, thank you. So then we're going to look for a pair of factors of 39 that add to give 16. So 39 doesn't have many pairs, right? So 1 and 39, 3 and 13, there we go. X plus 3 times x plus 13. So x plus 3 equals 0, or x plus 13 equals 0. X equals negative 3, or x equals negative 13, right? Just like we knew from before. Right? So both ways will work.